Welcome to episode 1 of the Me First method. Please download the workbook that goes along with this series. You'll find the link in the description and also on my website. Just scan the QR code. Before we talk about boundaries, before we talk about self-care, before we talk about confidence, we need to talk about something that quietly affects millions of people every single day. Self-abandonment. Now maybe you've never used that phrase before. Maybe you've called it being nice. Maybe you've called it being responsible. Maybe you've called it being a good mother, a good wife, a good employee, a good daughter, a good friend. Maybe you've called it love. But today I want to offer you a different perspective. What if many of the things you've been praised for throughout your life were actually forms of self-abandonment? What if always saying yes wasn't kindness? What if never asking for help wasn't strength? What if constantly putting everyone else first wasn't love? What if it was survival? Because for many people, self-abandonment doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up wearing a name tag. It quietly disguises itself as being helpful. It hides inside overgiving. It hides inside perfectionism. It hides inside people-pleasing. It hides inside being the strong one, the dependable one, the one everyone can count on. And because the world often rewards those behaviors, we rarely stop to question them. We receive compliments. People tell us how amazing we are, how selfless we are, how generous we are, how much they appreciate us. And yet, many of those same people go home exhausted, overwhelmed, resentful, lonely, burned out, disconnected from themselves. Because there is a very big difference between caring for others and abandoning yourself. The Me First method is not about becoming selfish. Let's get that out of the way right now. This program is not teaching you to stop loving people. It is not teaching you to stop helping people. It is not teaching you to become cold, self-centered, or uncaring. In fact, it's the opposite. Because when you consistently abandon yourself, you eventually have very little left to give. Imagine a well that is never replenished. Every day people come to draw water. You willingly give, you happily give, you generously give, but nobody ever pours anything back in. Eventually the well runs dry. The problem isn't that you gave. The problem is that you never allowed yourself to be replenished. That is what self-abandonment often feels like. And here's the part that surprises most people. Self-abandonment is rarely a character flaw. It's usually an adaptation. It's something you learned. At some point in your life, putting yourself last made sense. At some point it protected you. At some point it helped you survive. Maybe you learned that being agreeable reduced conflict. Maybe you learned that meeting everyone else's needs earned approval. Maybe you learned that your feelings weren't important. Maybe you learned that expressing your needs created tension. Maybe you learned that keeping everyone happy kept you safe. Children are incredibly adaptive. They learn quickly. They learn what gets attention. They learn what gets love. They learn what gets acceptance. And perhaps most importantly, they learn what gets rejected. If expressing your needs resulted in criticism, you may have learned to suppress your needs. If setting boundaries resulted in anger, you may have learned to avoid boundaries. If asking for help resulted in disappointment, you may have learned to become hyper-independent. What begins as survival often becomes identity. And that's where many people get stuck. Because eventually you stop saying, I learned to put myself last. And start saying, this is just who I am. You begin identifying as the caretaker, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the responsible one, the strong one, the helper, the rescuer, the one who never needs anything. And after years of carrying those identities, it becomes difficult to remember who you are underneath them. That is why so many people reach a point in life where they ask questions like, who am I? What do I actually want? Why am I so exhausted? Why am I so resentful? Why do I feel invisible? Why does it feel like everyone needs something from me? Those questions aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that a part of you has been waiting a very long time to be heard. Because beneath every act of self-abandonment is usually a need that was ignored. A truth that wasn't spoken. A boundary that wasn't honored. A feeling that wasn't acknowledged. And over time those unspoken parts begin accumulating, like unopened letters stacked in a corner. Eventually there are so many that you can't ignore them anymore. The anxiety grows, the resentment grows, the exhaustion grows, the sadness grows, the feeling of being disconnected from yourself grows. And one day you realize, I've spent so much time taking care of everyone else that I don't know how to take care of me. If that realization feels uncomfortable, good, not because I want you to suffer, but because awareness is where change begins. You cannot change what you refuse to see. And for many people this module is the first time they've ever considered that constantly putting themselves last might actually be harming them. Today I want you to begin looking at your life with curiosity. Not judgment, curiosity. We're not here to blame. We're not here to shame. We're not here to criticize every decision you've ever made. We're here to understand, because understanding creates freedom. The goal of this program is not to convince you that you've done everything wrong. The goal is to help you recognize where you've stopped including yourself in your own life. And once you can see it, you can begin changing it. That is where the Me First method begins. Not with guilt, not with blame, not with criticism, but with awareness. And awareness always comes before transformation. That's all for episode 1. Next week, tune in to episode 2 where we'll talk about how self-abandonment begins. Until then, choose you.